A lot has happened this past week in crypto. And today I want to touch on three things. Bitcoin going to $1 million, the banking system in the US, will it last, and the overall power of the dollar in the world. So let's dive into those three things. I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is More Than Blockchain. Number one, will Bitcoin go to $1 million? The short answer is yes. The long answer is not for a while. Now, I know Balaji made a bet that it will go to $1 million, but that's going to take some time because right now Bitcoin's only at around $28,000. And for it to go to $1 million would have to go almost 30x, almost 32x. And it would also mean that Bitcoin's overall market cap would be $10 trillion, which is 10 times the overall current crypto market cap. So it's not something I see likely to happen in the next 90 days, although Kathy Wood from ARK Invest has said that by 2028, 2030, Bitcoin will absolutely hit $1 million. There's something like $900 trillion worth of assets out in the world, including in fiat currencies and in real estate. And as the climate crisis basically starts to make a lot of real estate around the world not as desirable, people may look for other places to put their wealth. One of those places may be Bitcoin. The other part of that is fiat currencies. As fiat currencies start to die off and people in countries that have currencies that are just being devalued, whether it's at hyperinflationary levels or the currency is just becoming more and more worthless, both because the currency is being devalued and because prices have been inflated, we're going to see people from around the world, partly from or starting in the global south or the developing world, really start to move their money into Bitcoin. We're already seeing this in places like Venezuela, Argentina, and the Americas. We've seen it in Zimbabwe, and we're starting to see it in other countries in Africa and in Asia. That's number one. Bitcoin will eventually go to $1 million, but it's not going to happen overnight. Number two, the US banking system. Is it in trouble? In short, yes. In long, maybe it will take a long time. But we've seen multiple banks fail over the last couple weeks. And the banks didn't fail, and I know that this is like a common thing. The banks didn't fail because they had crypto exposure or they were holding Bitcoin. They failed because they bought financial products from the US government, treasuries, that at the time when they bought them, the 1.5% or 2% that they were giving in yield seemed like a lot because we were in a 0% yield world. However, in the last 16 months, the Fed basically went from almost zero all the way up to 4.75, now to 5 basis points of interest, meaning that all those investments in the treasuries really were actually losing money, or they were at an unrealized loss. So in the example of Silicon Valley Bank, when Silicon Valley had to dip into their treasuries that they didn't want to sell, I mean, they bought them for 30 years. They were hoping to have them over a 30-year period and sell them. They actually had to sell them at a loss. So they sold about 18 billion or something like that of treasuries, but they sold them at a loss because of the amount of yield they were getting from them and because of the current interest rate in the United States. So these bank crises have nothing to do with crypto or Bitcoin. They actually point to a larger systemic issue within the US banking system where treasury products from the government that are backed by the government are no longer providing yield in a high interest rate environment. And that may seem really convoluted, but I've attached some links below that will kind of dive into that further. But it's really important for everyone to understand, and I just wanted to cover it from this exact angle, that this has nothing to do with crypto or Bitcoin. This just has to do with problems with the current fiat system and the banking system in the United States. That is a perfect segue into number three. Number three, the dollar's global dominance. Will it always be this way? In the past week, we've seen the leader from China and we've seen the leader from Russia get together and basically say, hey, what's been going on for like the last 100 years may not be what happens over the next 100 years. And there's always been tension between the United States and Russia ever since the end of the Second World War, where we had the Cold War. And even now today, we're really kind of buying for supremacy, technological supremacy. It used to be the arms race. Then it was the space race. And now today it's the current race around data. Who can have the most data around of their citizens and the citizens of the world? And China and Russia, they have a lot of data on their citizens, whereas the United States may not be leading that. We in the United States have just a different idea around our own data rights, and Europe does too. But in places that are more dictatorial, like in Russia and China, they're really starting to control things. So if Russia and China decide to get together and they decide to do something that is different than the dollar, for example, because for such a long period of time in our history, maybe not in world history, but in, the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years, basically since Bretton Woods after World War II, the US dollar has been the global reserve currency. Now, if China decides to make it the digital yuan, or Russia decides to make a play and say, hey, you can only buy oil with Bitcoin, whatever happens, if those two countries come together and they create some new type of financing or some new type of money, I guess you could say, that they'll only accept, China will only accept for goods and Russia will only accept for oil. It could be Bitcoin, it could be the digital yuan, it could be something different. We will see an overnight change in the kind of how the world works. So those are three things to kind of keep in your mind. Bitcoin going to $1 million, the US banking system, and the precarity of the position of power of the US dollar. So those are all things that should be front and center as people start to think about money, the future, finance, investment. But what do you think? Do you think the dollar is going to be knocked off its perch by some kind of collaboration between Russia and China? Or do you think Bitcoin is going to go to $1 million in the next 90 days, like Balaji's guessed? Do you think the US banking system is really in a problem, or is it going to get worked out? Let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to this episode, and be sure to check out the show notes. I'm going to leave a bunch of links there that kind of build more on these three ideas. If you don't follow us already on social media, go follow us at More Than Blockchain on any social media. If you're watching this on YouTube, or you are not watching this on YouTube, but you're listening to this on a podcast platform, hop onto YouTube, check out all of our videos, subscribe. And if you enjoyed this episode and you thought it was interesting and that these three kind of ideas or questions are going to play a role in the future, go ahead and share this link with a friend, family member, or colleague. And as always, no matter where you're listening, if you're listening on podcast, if you're on Spotify, Google, or Apple, go ahead and subscribe. And thanks again for checking out More Than Blockchain, and I'll see you next time.